So I attended iTech, and at iTech, I had attended a session that was on flipped and blended learning, um, which had was a new concept for me. And now, using those vocabulary terms, doing the concepts really wasn't new. I had tried some things here and there, but I had just never had it labeled either flipped or blended. So I thought that was really interesting. And then I attended another session, which was on blended writing instruction. And so from that, I actually won a year's subscription for this program that the lady used. And I was like, okay, so I can try it. So I kind of dabbled with those things. And then in the process, I came across the cohort at the AEA. And I was like, well, I love learning. And I was already getting my master's. And so we had kind of started talking about flipped and blended learning there because it's fully online. So then I started taking the AEA cohort concurrently with my master's cohort to learn more, and then dabbling within my own classroom on trying things. First I did, some writing stuff, and then I did some grammar things. So I would record my grammar lesson, and then the kids could rewatch it, or I would just record it and then they could do it at center time. So that's really where I started dabbling. You have classes that are full of diverse learners, and specifically in science is where I thought I could take an entire topic course unit and I would be able to flip it. And I started doing that because science should be up and it should be moving around and kids should be having hands-on, but they were sitting on the carpet and we were reading books and we were taking notes and journaling, and I was bored out of my mind and they were bored out of their mind. And I was like, there has to be a different way. There just had to be a different way, because Google Classroom came along. So then I started using Google Classroom and then trying to really create a full online and flipped science unit. And then as the kids were learning, I would go around and I would meet and talk with the kids about what they were learning that day. And then I could meet them where they were and teach them, give them more things to work on, redirect their learning if they were off. And so my path went from there into Moodle, and organized that differently, and then trying that with the kids. And it allowed me to do more assessment checks and journal writing, quizzes. Attaching work became a little bit difficult because of security issues with the kids. So then we had this hybrid Google Classroom Moodle course, and they were just super excited about it, that they were willing to try whatever we needed. And they adapted like chameleons. They were great. Anything I threw at them or we changed or modified, and I kept telling them that they were our little guinea pigs. And so Mrs. Whitver was trying something new, and they would provide feedback after every single unit. And so we would talk about how we could continue to change and add to what we were doing to make it a better learning experience. And then we would make those tweaks as we went along, just so I could meet the kids where they were and make learning more engaging and meaningful for them. And it was a very rewarding experience at the end of the year. It was really great. The students had their logins, and they each had a Chromebook. So then for science time, they had a science notebook and a journal and a folder. And when it was time for science, they just came in and they just started doing. It was always at a set time. They would come in, they would get right to work because it was super engaging and motivating for them. As they were doing science, I could go around and I could ask for their checklist and I could see what they were working on. I also had the kids start where they wanted. So if we had a sun, earth, moon unit, if some kids wanted to start with sun, they would start with sun, and other kids would start with moon, and other kids would start with earth. And then I could pull the group. Sometimes I would pull the whole group and say, all the earth kids, I need to talk with you today. And we would share our learning and learn from each other. And I would do the same with the sun group and the same with the moon group. So kids were learning on the floor and at desks. They'd go out in the commons. They would find their own websites or their own YouTube videos. I would have linked those. And so it was just 100% engagement in online learning. And they just made sure that with that checklist, that whatever they did directly tied back with some learning that they had to do with our district standards and curriculum. So it wasn't extra. If they wanted to learn something new, like with the moon unit, they all wanted to learn about like the moon landing and astronauts, which wasn't connected with the curriculum, but I didn't want to tell them no. So we would just find ways to integrate what the new content that they wanted to learn in with something that they had to learn. So if we would talk about like the surface of the moon, then we would talk about astronauts and when they would land on the moon. And then they would have to fuse those learnings to talk about like what the astronauts learned and the things that they found. And they would talk about like the footprints on the moon and no atmosphere and the craters and like all of those things. It was really like they were just fueled by sheer curiosity, and the checklist just kept them reined in from devouring anything that they could find on the topic. And it was fun. Sometimes I had a hard time edging my way into conversations with kids. Like if I would go to sit there and meet with them, it was like, I'm learning, like, and you're in my way today. Some worked by themselves, some worked with two, some worked with three. I mean, I didn't say no often. If they wanted to show their learning by making a board game, they made a board game. If they wanted to write a commercial and record it and edit it using WeVideo to show me they're learning in something, I said, okay, give me a story map. Go do that. They just produced these things which showed their mastery over the content when we did it that way. And it was one of the most magical things I've experienced in the 13 years that I've taught. I got that a lot. Oh, you can't do it. Or I'm struggling with high schoolers. How can you get it to do it with third graders? I mean, you had to scaffold it. I had to show them how to do it. And like our first flipped and blended was really paper pencil like thing. And I really had to model and show them what it looked like and then release that independent control over what they were doing. But by the end of the year, you'd say science. You didn't even have to say science. They knew. And they were 5 steps ahead of me by the time I made it in the door from recess duty. They were there. They had their stuff out. They were on computers doing whatever they needed to do. I didn't even have to. Classroom management was a breeze. And that's what it's like when your kids are engaged. You don't have to fight when your kids are so engaged in their learning. For me as a teacher, the area of like assessment and being on top of what the kids were doing, because they were doing lots of stuff every day. And I would have to look at what they were doing if they turned something in to give them that immediate feedback. And that was really difficult for me. So like I modified and tweaked as I went on, and the kids would hand things in and we did a folder system. Instead of them just turning things in online, they had to come and tell me sometimes because keeping track of that. So for me, like my expectations for communicating with the kids, I think could have been honed for the kids. My expectations for their learning, like by the end, they were spot on. They were always engaged and always on task. And I had very few kids that were like spent their time not doing what they were doing. And if they did, we did like every day they started, they had to make a goal on what they wanted to accomplish that day. And we had a calendar. So we plotted everything out on a calendar so they knew if they had 5 weeks to get it done, every day they crossed it off. So on the calendar, they would write a goal for what they wanted to accomplish on that day. And then at the end of science, they either had to highlight it green or they had to highlight it red. And so they could visually track, okay, like I'm on track for what I need to do, or I've had 3 red days in a row. And then we would meet and talk about, okay, well, why haven't you been meeting what your goals are? So just honing those practices, making sure like kids weren't sitting there, even though I was walking around the room. The district in which I work at also has like their district-wide professional development. And so as I started to learn, like I had taken some classes on some tools that people had used when they were doing flipped and online. So I would take things here or there. And then I started to teach. So then I presented sessions on what I was doing and allowed people to come in, and we talked about like using capacity matrices and use in the flipped and blended format, and how to do them together and work with kids. So then not only was I partaking in professional development, then I started teaching it. And then from that experience, then I would also come back and hone what I was doing just to improve and to make it better. You can find the right thing that just lights that fire in the kids. Everything else is gravy. Their engagement and their motivation was on point. They were super excited about their learning, which then transferred over into other things. Flipping and blending, we could meet the curriculum, we could do what we needed to do, and the kids could do it in the way that they needed to do, and it didn't matter if they were low in math and high in reading, or low in math and reading, or an ESL student, or had just joined our classroom. Like, it didn't matter. Like, we had a move in, and they came in, and I worked with them to get them going, like did like a quick gradual release and showed them what they needed to do. And then they picked it up and they ran and they loved it. Like, it didn't matter, because the kids were met right where they were, and they moved from one like unit into like another. We kind of like wrapped it up, and if they finished early, they got to pick where they wanted to extend their learning. And so it was such a great process. It was a lot of upfront work, which like is a big takeaway to know going into it, that it's a lot of upfront work, but it makes the rest of it go so much smoother. If you can dedicate the time to get it done and organized, your classroom, if you can do it right, you'll feel it. There was not a second. I think I taught harder, and I had to be on my toes more when I was doing flipped and blended, because you can't plan for what you're really doing that day, because everybody is doing different things. And so I would just invite parents to come in or talk to their kids and have the kids show their parents. Like, this year we started doing like online digital portfolios with Seesaw. And I really think if I had had that when I did the flipped and blended, it would have really helped a lot.